Herkese merhaba. Katıldığınız için teşekkür ederim. Önce ufak bir duyuru yapmak istiyorum. Panelimiz İngilizce gerçekleşecek. Türkçe olarak dinlemek isteyen katılımcılarımızın ekranın sağ alt köşesinden Türkçe seçeneğini seçmesini ve Türkçe odasına geçmesini rica ederim. Çok teşekkürler. And welcome. So good evening, everyone, and good morning to all of our panelists, participants who are joining us basically from the other side of the world. We have people joining us from Canada, the US, I think. We might have some people from Germany. But first of all, we would like to thank all of you for investing your time and choosing to be here with us today, basically. My name is Nazlı, İlksavaş. I am the Seed Circle representative and a graduate of the Sezin School. Today, I will be moderating this panel alongside Sezin High School students who are Sude Sürer and Berk Yılmaz, while Burcu Boncukçu, who is also a Seed Circle representative, will be facilitating on the Turkish channel. We will have Meltem Erkmen, who is the Sezin School's corporate communication specialist on the English side, helping us today. So in our panel, we will be discussing the ways to reach sustainable hope in family, in education, and within our lives around the question of how to create a hopeful future with, of course, our panelists from the field. We will be having a Q&A session at the end, so you are more than welcome to share with us any questions you have throughout the session. Please feel free to write them down in the questions section via the chat. Make sure to choose everyone so that all of us can see your questions instead of choosing only hosts and panelists. And so yes, as the Sezin School Seed Circle, we came across the Hope Studies Central during our research on the theme of hope. Affiliated with the University of Alberta, Canada. Hope Studies Central is the only research unit in the world devoted to the study of hope in human living for the past 29 years. I must say that the field of hope research is vast, I think, with research indicating hope is associated with beneficial outcomes in physical and mental health, education, sports, and even businesses. So our panelists today are Dr. Denise Larsen, who is the director of Hope Studies Central and the former elementary school teacher, Chelsea Hobbs, doctoral student of counseling psychology at the University of Alberta, Canada, and Amy Badger, fifth grade teacher from Edmonton Public School. Thank you again for being here with us. But before I leave the floor to our lovely panelists, I feel like our moderator, Sude, might have something little to add.
Hello again, welcome everyone. I'm an 11th grade student, Sude Sürer, in Sezin High School. I'll be one of your moderators today. And basically, recently within our school community, we've addressed the question of what is hope? And there were quite a lot of variations in the answers. Some people defined hope as the very essence of life. Others said that it was the embodiment of life. And honestly, I'm curious to see how the audience here today would define hope. I'll leave the floor to Chelsea Hobbs to explore what hope is.
Thank you very much, Sude and Nazlı, for the welcome, and welcome to everyone. I'm delighted that people from all over the world are joining us today. So as a doctoral student in a hope-focused research lab, I have the great pleasure of talking about hope a lot. And one thing that I have come to learn, and one thing that I really like about hope, is that we each have our own unique understanding and our own legitimate experiences of hope. And to show you what I mean, and also to help us kick off our panel today, I'd like to invite everyone to participate in a short exercise. So one of the more popular activities from Hope Studies Central and the Strengths, Hope, and Resourcefulness program for school mental health is what we call the Hope Is poem. And to start, I would first just ask you to reflect on how you might finish the sentence, hope is. And because, like I mentioned, we all have our own experiences of hope, there's absolutely no way to get this activity wrong. And then once you have had a moment to reflect and think, what I would encourage you to do is share in the chat box a short word or phrase that comes to mind when you think about what hope is to you. And Nazlı had the excellent reminder to just make sure you share your answers with everyone when you're putting them in the chat box. And you can share your answer in either English or Turkish, whatever feels right for you. So really just answering in the chat how you might answer the sentence stem hope is, and what hope means to you. So I hear light and life. Some answers are starting to come in.
We have
All about survival.
connecting to the future.
Oh yes, future coming in a couple times. Happiness, determination. This is fabulous. Lots of answers
Living.
coming in. Optimism. Hope is definitely related to lots of other words like optimism, wishing, goals, which we may touch on today. Breathing.
Some say hope is freedom and imagination and belief on the Turkish side.
Wow. Wow. This is fabulous.
Hope is a window opening to the future. Hope is kids.
Oh yes, definitely. Hope is kids. And I think what we're starting to notice from these reflections that are coming in is a small piece of how complex and multifaceted hope can be. And I think from the participation, we're learning and demonstrating that hope is different. It can mean different things to different people. And I think today in real time, we're also getting a brief snapshot into how hope might vary across cultures as we have individuals joining in from different parts in the world. So within me, oh, it's stubborn. I like that also. Sometimes it's hard to get rid of. Fabulous. Well, I know some answers are still coming in, but what I might do for the sake of time is sort of start to transition. If you still haven't shared and you'd like to, please just pop it in the chat. And I just want to let everyone know that our fabulous moderators are gathering our responses, both in Turkish and in English. And I really encourage you to stay tuned because we're really going to come back and end our session today with revisiting this Hope is poem. But for now, I'll just thank everyone for your participation. What an excellent way to kick off the panel. And I'll turn things back over to Nazlı to get us started.
Well, thank you, Chelsea. I think it was really motivating for me to see all of those different types of answers in the chat section. And thank you for leading this activity with us, actually. So as Chelsea stated, we will be sharing the poem created by your answers, which are keeping on coming in at the end of the panel. And who knows, maybe there might be some changes in views of hope by then. But so unlike we predicted, actually, our research shows that the cognitive aspect of hope actually outweighs the emotional aspect. And I might actually turn to Dr. Denise Larsen at this point and ask, could you please tell us a little bit more about the cognitive aspect of hope and about more in depth of your research?
Oh, thank you very much, Nazlı. I'm delighted to be with you here today. It is truly a privilege and honor to be visiting Sezin School. And I was fascinated to see the words that came in because, of course, when we work across cultures and languages, hope sometimes takes on different inflections or different meanings. And so we see lots of similarity in the hope is words that are coming up right now to what we know in English. And it'd be fascinating also to see the translations from Turkey for us, because I think we'll learn some really fascinating facets of hope in Turkey as well. So like you mentioned, I am the director of Hope Studies. Hope Studies has been a research unit affiliated with the University of Alberta for just about 30 years. And we focus specifically on applied research in hope in applied settings. So education, psychology, health, and so forth. That's really our specialization for hope. We've studied hope with individuals and groups. We've also studied hope with respect to serious health conditions like chronic pain and Parkinson's disease. And I guess most importantly for this talk, we also study child and youth hope development, the role of hope in classrooms and cross-cultural understandings of hope. So on this slide, I'm just inviting everybody to visit us here in Edmonton. This is virtually, this is our research lab at the University of Alberta. And I've just included pictures of a few of our publications here. I'll move on to the next slide. I have the good fortune, of course, with working with both Amy Badger and Chelsea Hobbs, who are on the panel today, as well as many additional graduate students, faculty members, and teachers within the Edmonton area. In our work, we're keenly interested in supporting student and teacher social emotional health and well-being, and have devoted a large project to studying this question. And I think particularly pertinent given the onset of the pandemic and the way that it is dragging out. So from research, we learned that 15 to 25% of children and youth suffer from at least one mental health problem. We also know that from our Mental Health Commission in Canada that 70% of mental illnesses have their onset during childhood and adolescence. So it's clearly very important that we focus on the mental health needs of our students in class. And then if we think about teachers and the important role of hope in the work that they do and their well-being, we know that the demands of the profession can also threaten hope. And so we're concerned with supporting teacher hope as well as mental health also. So for example, research indicates that approximately 33% of teachers leave in the first 3 years and about 45% after the first 5 years, recognizing that this is a very demanding and stressful profession in many ways. So how do we support teachers, the work they do? Further, we know in a Canada-specific study that 70% of Canadian teachers identify a need for more knowledge about mental health for working with their students. So teachers are seeing children's mental health needs in the classroom and seeking support to help with student well-being. We're in the midst of data collection on our hope-focused study that we conducted over the last year during the pandemic in Canadian schools. And 3 of our earliest findings suggest really important experiences related to hope for students and teachers. The first being that students are really identifying a sense of isolation and struggle. A lot of classes have been virtual over the last year, and some are flipping back and forth between virtual and in-person this year as well. So that sense of isolation for students and missing their classmates and their teachers. In addition, teachers' recognition that the motivation for students is really of concern, and sometimes even for themselves working virtually, it's difficult to stay motivated and challenging themselves working in this kind of a context as well. And then finally, some of our students in the study, particularly high school students, are experiencing difficulty in seeing a way out of the pandemic and into a good future for themselves as they anticipate leaving high school. So these students are highlighting the difficulty of seeing the future with a good career for themselves as a possibility post-pandemic. So we can be really curious about what definition do we use for hope. There are thousands of research studies on hope now, like literally thousands. We have an online database if you're interested in looking it up on our website at some point. Researchers have come up with research definitions that work well in research studies, yet hope is an everyday experience that each of us already have experience with. So we use a definition that we find that teachers, students, and parents kind of resonate with themselves. And that is that hope, the definition of hope is the ability to envision a future in which we wish to participate. And here we see some of the threads coming through from the Hope poem, right? The future, a sense of optimism, a sense of doing something meaningful, a sense that I'd like to be active in moving toward my future. So given the documented challenges that teachers and students have identified with mental health in the classroom, why would we focus on hope? Interestingly, a huge amount of research on hope in the last four decades. And what we learned from that research is that virtually any desirable outcome that you might want to identify is associated with higher hope. So we have lots of evidence to suggest that hope is powerful, and that it has there is strong support for focusing on hope in schools. So here's a few examples. Hope is a strong predictor of career goals and efficacy in moving towards these goals. Hope is a strong predictor of physical health, psychological adjustment, and enriched personal relationships. Higher hope is also a strong predictor of academic achievement, positive affect, so feeling good, resiliency, motivation, and athletic performance. And I think this one might resonate for some folks as well, that high hope predicts lower tobacco and cannabis use in adolescence, which I think is a fascinating study as well. People sometimes ask us if people are just born with the capacity to hope with others or not. This is a good question. And it may be that some folks naturally have more of a trait that we call hope than others. But I think the more important point at this point is that hope is teachable and it's learnable. We all understand something of hope from our lived experiences, and this includes very small children, we know from our research. So experiences of hope are resources that can be brought into the school and fostered in the classroom to support student learning and to foster a healthy school community. So we're going to share some of that research with you here in just a moment. There's a beautiful slide here with an image that I think might be well known in Turkey following the fires, Nazlı tells me. Research tells us that hope predicts flourishing and easier to implement than resilience when we're thinking about implementation in schools. So we'll share with you now a bit about our Strengths, Hope, and Resourcefulness program for school mental health. And I'll introduce it, but then I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Amy Badger, who is our grade 5 teacher and part of the project and able to tell you in live detail just what it is for her in the classroom and the students. This is a Facebook and Twitter overlay that we've had as part of a media campaign in Canada here. Teachers Grow Hope. You'll find it in English and French in Canada because we're a bilingual country. So here are some of the additional predictors of and reasons for focusing on hope with children and youth. It predicts positive affect and good grades. It's linked with positive coping and an enhanced ability to overcome obstacles, which I think is really relevant here post-pandemic or as we move through the pandemic. For teachers, in terms of their well-being, hope is a sustaining factor in difficult and stressful workplace conditions, particularly in educational contexts. And so as we move into the program now, I'll just highlight that this is a program focused on universal design, meaning that it's meant for every child in the school. Those who are experiencing more difficult, serious mental health issues are encouraged to also seek referral to specialists like psychologists, but the program itself is good for everybody. So here's how the research design was laid out, and then I'll move on. It came to us, we devised it in 3 phases, and here's the overview. In phase 1 during 2019-2020, over 100 teachers attended a series of 2-day workshops on hope, learning how to implement hope effectively in their classroom and learning to sustain their own hope. That following summer during the holiday break, 7 teachers alongside university researchers volunteered to co-create hope lessons in classrooms and schools. These lessons were based on over 30 years of Hope research and practices at Hope Studies. And I think Chelsea's just dropped the link in the chat there for you to visit the website and you could take a look at some of those lessons. And then over this last year, teachers implemented Hope lessons in their regular curriculum in Edmonton. This was during the pandemic and while many students were learning online. The university research team met regularly with teachers to support their Hope lessons, and the website containing all of the students' lessons and many other resources was created. So the website is free and available for your use. Many teachers our parents have decided they would like to focus on that website too, because they get ideas for activities with their students. So Ms. Amy Badger was one of our teacher researchers on the SHARP SMH project, and she's worked with Hope for many years in her classroom. She'll now share some of the experiences with you, working with Hope as a teacher and as a parent herself.
Well, thank you, Denise, for the lovely introduction of everything we basically need to know about Hope, I guess. We all, I think, appreciate you sharing your research with us. And personally, I think it was the SHARP SMH program and the hashtag Teachers Grow Hope campaign that you ran on social media that particularly caught my attention, actually. And even faced with COVID-19 pandemic, our teachers are an important source of hope, feeling both the hope of students and themselves. And in fact, I think knowing the fact that hope is a learnable and a measurable skill gives people hope. But I don't know, what do you think, Berk?
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, it certainly is, in my opinion. But I'm also wondering about something else here. What is it that we can do to learn how to be hopeful? At this point, I think I'll leave it to Amy Badger now to tell us a little bit about the activities that she does with her students in the classroom, actually. The hopeful living spaces which she designed in her classroom are, in my opinion, very admirable. So, Amy, could you please explain some of the activities that you do?
I sure can. Thank you, Berk. So here are just some pictures of my classroom. I have tried to create a hopeful space in 3 classrooms and 2 schools. And it is just always one of my favorite parts of the summer when I come back is to design my space. So as you can see from the pictures, there's a couple things that are consistent throughout. So one is the use of nature. I kind of use nature as my color palette and my inspiration. Literally, I have a tree in my classroom made of poodle noodles. But a few years ago when, or I guess it still is, the Reggio movement is really big and everything was beige. I'm like, I can't function in a beige classroom. But using nature inspired colors and patterns and things like that became a very calming space to myself and to my students. The other thing that I make sure to do is I set things up to encourage group work. So you can see there's groups of tables and the couch space and the carpet space all together, but there's enough flexible seating, whether it's the rug in the back or places for kids to break out on their own, that choice of allowing the kids to understand where they work best is very important. You can skip to the next one now. Thanks. So the other part of teaching hopefully, and I know a lot of teachers resist at first, is that it's something extra. It's an add-on to existing curriculum that they are mandated to follow. However, I've been doing this for over 15 years, and I can confidently say that hope integrates into all curriculum very easily into your core subjects, and of course into health, phys ed, like it fits everywhere. And once you get in that mindset of looking for it and becoming, and that being your practice, it's quite easy to do. In the middle here is an example of a poem that one of my grade 3 students wrote last year. We were studying residential schools and the impact. And so as part of learning poetry and figurative language, this student wrote a beautiful cinquain on how students in residential schools might have felt. So again, along with the LA, there's lots of opportunity to look at figurative language, whether you're creating poems, or another assignment that I like to do is to take songs that students find hopeful and look at the lyrics and examine theme and figurative language and things like that. We also do in grade 5, we study Canada and social studies. So we like to do hopeful biographies, we call them. Also in social studies, a big part of our curriculum is to look at others' perspectives. So I've had guest speakers come in and talk about how they view hope, what hope means to them. One parent of a student that had just recently immigrated from Nepal, her dad was a writer and a poet and a teacher. And so he gave a beautiful presentation on what hope meant in his culture and to him. And another parent came in and he was a recruiter for the U of A. And he'd traveled all over the world. And so he had brought pictures of things that he had found hopeful around the world. Another place I really like to bring in the hope, again, in social studies is in grade 6, we learn about government, which can be a very boring and dry topic for 11 and 12-year-olds. So we talk about the structure and the purpose of government, but as we bring in elected officials as guest speakers, one of the questions the kids always ask them and put them on the spot is, how do you bring hope to others as part of your job? And it's kind of neat to see them squirm a little bit and really think about what it is that they're doing in their community. And then of course, the final project, which I'll talk about a little later, addresses outcomes in social science, health, math even, and of course, language arts. So another one of the things that we talked about is the kind of the connection between learning hope at school and hope at home, because as a teacher, one of my goals is that what I'm teaching them in school transfers into their life after they leave me from school. So in the beginning of the year in September, as part of my welcome newsletter, I'll write a little blurb to parents and students about what the Hope Project is, that they'll be participating in it. If they have no choice, it's part of the curriculum, and why I think it's such an important part of their education. Another way I encourage parents and people at home to participate is, as a teacher, I don't send homework home. I figure if kids are working 6 hours a day at school, they really don't want to go home and do more. But I do send Hope homework home. And so one of them is the Hope soundtrack assignment. And so they go home, and after we've looked at figurative language, and they talk with their parents about songs that they find hopeful. And a lot of the songs that come back are usually a little bit older than I would expect my 11s and 12-year-olds to listen to, but it's a great discussion, and they usually tell me about it. Yeah, I talked to my mom and I talked to my dad, and a lot of them will have siblings that I've previously taught, so they're engaged in the conversation as well. My own son, my oldest son, is 13. And so when I was starting to do this in the classroom, he would talk to me about it too, because, you talk in the car at the end of the day. And so he started, when he was listening to music, is that a hopeful song, Mom? Do you think that one would be hopeful? And so I'd say, I don't know. What do you think? Listen to the lyrics. And so he'd start pulling out pieces of that too. So it was a fun conversation. Another thing that I do is a hope map. So this is a really old song and it's going to date me, but the band Nickelback in Alberta here, they have a song called If Everyone Cared. And it's just a beautiful starter for really the whole project. And what's really interesting is the video. They put a spotlight on Nelson Mandela and Betty Williams and Peter Benenson, and we talk about those people. And then we talk about who supported those people, especially Nelson Mandela being in prison for 27 years. There had to be people behind him, and who are those people, and what characteristics do they have? And we look at those characteristics, and they're supportive, they're loyal, they're determined. The kids will brainstorm those characteristics, and then we kind of transfer that into our own life. And I'll give them, I think it's on the previous slide or the next slide. There's circles. They'll look at, it's the previous one. They'll look at those circles there, and they'll think about who are the people in their family that would meet those qualities, or school and friends. And it's just a very it's a great way for me to connect, because I'll go through my own experiences of who I put in my map. And, I'll say, yes, I have 3 sisters and 2 parents, but, I wouldn't put all of my sisters in this map, because not all of my sisters do I go to for support. And one of them is actually here viewing the panel right now. And I talk about my own children, right? My own children give me great hope, but they're not necessarily the people I go to when I'm having trouble or I need that support. So it's a great conversation with the kids. Another activity that I sent home is called Hope Hoops. And I do this after the kids have been exposed to the word hope and have a good enough grasp that they can explain it themselves. And what it is that they have to contact 4 people in their family. I usually say, you know, adults or at least in high school, and they give their hopes for that student. So what they hope for that student. And it's sometimes I've cried when the things come back. They're just beautiful. And it's funny listening to the kids come back and say, yeah, my mom just hopes I have a good life. She wasn't very specific in what she said. And they become very critical of what that means. This activity in particular was really powerful during COVID last spring when we started our lockdown and our isolation, because they couldn't see anybody and they couldn't go outside their home. So they were forced to call up grandma or grandpa or an aunt or a cousin or somebody that they hadn't, you know, talked to in a while and have that conversation with them. So it was really neat to see their responses when they came back, and they were so excited to share. One of the other activities that I do and I love, and you can switch to the next slide for this one, is called a hope walk. And so we start by, I have the kids guess the 7 C's of hope. I say there's 7 C words that are part of every hope project. And I make the kids guess, and we have a little competition, and it's tons of fun. And then after we look at what those words mean, we go for a walk around the community, and all the kids will have a camera or some sort of device to take pictures, and they have to find examples in their community of things that would meet each of those 7 C's. And it's just mind-blowing to see how they interpret those things in their community. And the purpose of the assignment is that they come back and teach others about hope. So they usually create some sort of multimedia presentation around it. And then the bento box and the red tree kind of came about this past year as my colleague on the research team, Natalie Kuhn, and I were both teaching online last year, not in person. And we really noticed just how the mental health of our students was really struggling. And we couldn't feel that we were really teaching hope the way we wanted to. And so we adapted in the hope walk. Instead of making a video, it was a collection of things that you could look at and refer to when you weren't feeling so hopeful. So she used the bento box template with her grade 2s. And then I adapted mine just a little bit. We read the book, The Red Tree by Sean Tan, and the tree becomes a symbol for the girl in the book. And you see that the red tree is always with her. And so we put together pictures and videos and sounds, and we use the whole multimedia experience as something that the kids could look back to. And, you know, every time I introduce a hope assignment, they always look at me like, oh, here's another one. But then once they start doing it, they just get so excited about it. And they're so proud to show it to me or to their parents or to each other. And it's just such a wonderful experience. Okay, go to the next slide. Sorry, I'm talking fast. I feel like I have so much to get through. So the year culminates with this Hope Focused Service Learning project. This is sort of the big reason I do this. And when I started this many years ago, in the classroom, I had all these questions about like, what is hope and why is it important? And I knew it was something that was important for kids, but I just, as a teacher, had no idea how to sequence it. And it was messy and it was open-ended, and I was kind of almost scared of it to even try it. So I worked with another lady at Hope Study Central called Lenora LeMay, and she introduced me to these 5 phases of hope. And so I used that to kind of plan out and map out my year. So the first phase is what is hope, and that's where we do the things like the hope walk or the hope hoops, and the kids really learn about the different definitions of hope, and their definition is different from the person beside them and can change within the year, and that's great. And then we move into how does hope affect quality of life? And we look at doing needs assessments around the school and the community. And I define our community as a place that we can get to by bus in a day and back, because the service learning part is very important. I don't just want it to be a fundraising thing. I want them to actually be interacting with the people that they're bringing, or the space that they're bringing hope to. Of course, that changed when we went online, but usually that's what it was. And then from those needs assessments, they get the ideas for their hope projects. And so every child writes a persuasive essay, which is their project proposal. And they work on it for about a month, and hands down, it is the best piece of writing that I get from my kids that year. They are so invested in this, and they know that the quality of the writing depends on whether their project gets picked, and they're just so excited about it. And yeah, they write a 5-paragraph essay like it's nothing. It's wonderful. Then they have to present their essays to the class. They read them out loud. And then we choose 2 or 3 projects to carry out in the months of May and June, depending on how complex the projects are. And then part of that is always reflection. How did it make you feel? What did you notice? What did you observe the other people doing? And what do you think that means? And looking at those things. And then of course, the last one, celebration. So even though it's the last phase, it's something that we do throughout the whole year. I had one kid a couple years ago come to me at the beginning of the year and say, you know, Miss Badger, I'm just not a hopeful person. Like, I just can't. And I said, nope, no problem. I said, I know you'll get there, and I'll be with you. And then at Christmas, he writes me this Christmas card, and it said, I hope you have a wonderful Christmas. And I said, look, you are hopeful. You're using the word. And then at the end of the year, when he was doing his project, he's like, yeah, I'm really good at this hope stuff now. And he was so proud of himself, and it was so good. You can flip to the last slide. So I'm sure I'm over my time limit. I'm really sorry. So the impact of teaching hopefully, I mean, you can see why I do it, I hope. It's the best part of my job. It's the most rewarding. I think it's the most effective thing that I do in the classroom with my kids. It's the stuff that they ask for. And I find that the more challenging the class, the more they ask for the hope activities. And it's the activities and the things that when kids come back and visit me later, that's what they talk about. So that's why I do it. So sorry for the rush.
Thank you, Amy. It was lovely to listen to all of the activities. Actually, I really wanted like a list of them to get through and see them whenever I want.
You can go to the website. Most of them are there.
Yes, exactly. Well, thank you once again for making us actually realize the power of filling our minds, and as well as our minds, our surroundings with hope as well. So now I think our time is getting slowly to the closing. So let's move to the Q&A section. But I think generating questions might be challenging at first. So we can give you a couple of minutes to think about some questions that you would like to ask to our panelists. But while you are thinking about your questions, you can share them in the chat section like you did with the Hope Is poem. Maybe I can turn to our students who are actually going to be having their exams next week, and they are in need of a little hope, I believe. So they might have a couple of questions to the panelists, maybe. Do you guys have any questions, Sude or Berk, whoever would you? Yeah, Sude, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think I can speak on behalf of every student here. We say that exam weeks, they're kind of a cycle of panic, despair, and then hope afterwards, where after the exams are over, you go, oh, finally, that's done. And then 2 months later, it's exam week again. And especially the 11th and 12th graders here, we can say, I have exams in the next week. They're small exams compared to the one that the huge one I'll be taking 2 years from now at the end of 12th grade, the university exam. So what I'd like to ask is, rather than being hopeful, seeing hope in the first stages, I feel like a lot of us can get there on our own, but what we really struggle with conceptually is how to preserve that hope once we get it. It's something I struggle with a lot, I know that. It's something that I've seen a lot of my friends struggle with as well. And even though we try to help each other a lot, the fact that we have trouble with it sometimes means that we can drag each other into the more negative side of things. So I just like to ask, what can we do specifically to preserve hope once we get it? Because it's hard to attain, but it's hard to keep a hold of. So yeah, that's my question.
Maybe I'll respond first. Chelsea and Amy, you may have some comments as well. My overview on hope was very quick, and Chelsea will know this because she took a whole course on hope with me, and so there's much more to know. And I think that your question is so appropriate, Sude, and I appreciate it. So I think some things that we know about hope might be helpful to you. Yes, it's a hard time, and that's understandable when you're facing those big exams and it feels very important and stressful. So one of the things is it's very normal for hope to fluctuate, like to go up and down. And so when you feel like, uh-oh, I think I've just lost it again, don't panic, because that just makes it worse. It's very normal for it to fluctuate, and that because it feels like it's hard to find right now doesn't mean it's disappeared. It just means you've lost sight of it. So I think that one of the things we know from our many years of doing this at Hope Studies is it can be super helpful to practice hope. So it is, think of hope more as a process than an event. It's not a one-time thing. And that means that this is what my dissertation supervisor, who was responsible for some of my big exams, told me. She started the Hope Foundation, the one that I lead now. Think of hope like hope hygiene, taking care of your hope. Kind of like the way we do dental hygiene and we brush our teeth every day, we need to practice hope every day. And so all of the activities, the Hope is poem, the Hope hoops, all of these different ideas are ways of reminding ourselves that we need to pay attention to hope every day. So some folks have said to me, I get up in the morning and I ask myself, where is the hope for me today? Or I put a picture beside my bed that reminds me of hope. So I think these sound like such simple activities, but we're actually talking about sort of shifting our mental set. And to shift our mental set takes practice. And it also takes practice with our friends and our colleagues, right? I know this from my colleagues working at the U. I don't think I'm telling any stories out of school here, but it's easy to get into conversations that, you know, when we see a threat or we come frightened, to get into a conversation that makes it seem like the whole world's gotten dark and things are going to be difficult and it can't possibly work out. And it takes work actually to be intentional, to think intentionally about the kind of conversations we're prepared to have and to invite our colleagues and our friends into those conversations. So this is a little bit of an aside, but it is a curiosity for me because I don't know in Turkish how often the word, is it umut comes up. But listen for it in conversations, because in English, it's like the 400th most common word when you do the research, which means it appears in conversation a lot. What's happening, those people are not thinking about it. So there are these little threads of hope appearing, but we have to learn to listen for them. And then we have to kind of learn to magnify those conversations. And then I guess the last thing that I would say is that there are a couple of different kinds of hope. There's the things we hope for, like a good grade on an exam. Totally understandable. Yes, I'm with you. But there's also the kind of person we hope to be. Are we being the kind of person we hope to be? So that's much closer about something meaningful personally. And I say that because we are so much more than any one exam. right? As people, as a person, you are so much more than your exams. They're important, but Sude overall, important person. And that would be true for all of us. We are so much more than any particular goal at the moment. Because when we pin our hopes only to goals, it goes like this a lot, right? Yeah. Great question. Long answer. Chelsea, did you have anything you wanted to add, or Amy? Okay.
Thank you. It was a great question and a great answer.
That was very enlightening. Yeah.
Oh,
Berk, would you like to ask anything, or should we ask our audience? Would you like to?
Well, yeah, I think I could ask something, but I don't think anything that I could ask would be something new, that you gave an answer so detailed that it could, it basically answered everything that I could ask at this point. So I guess thank you.
Well, on behalf of everyone, good luck with your exams, guys. And we hope that it all goes well. So just checking the chat section, I think we have a couple of questions, and I don't want to take a lot of time. So let's say we have 10 minutes to answer as much as questions as we have. Maybe the first question, are there any personality traits that makes a person more hopeful or hopeless? Who would like
Chelsea, do you want to take this one, or should I?
I think you're on a roll, Denise, so why don't you just carry on?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I kind of alluded to this at the beginning of my little talk, and that is that there are scales that will measure hope trait, and that's interesting, but I think it's more interesting to be aware that hope as a state can fluctuate, and it's actually that fluctuation that is an advantage to us in school, because if it can go down, we can also do activities to learn and teach to augment or build hope. I think that some people say, well, if we live in a difficult circumstance, I think I saw that in a future question here. Again, excellent question, and of course it has implications. So I don't want to dismiss the difficulties, the really serious struggles that our students face. I used to teach grade 2, and I taught in an inner city school, and I knew that my students often went home to very difficult circumstances. But I think that it is still possible to teach and foster hope in the classroom, and that I know that many of our students go home and they actually teach their parents a little bit about hope too. And certainly if our students are in difficult circumstances, wouldn't we want to make sure that what was happening at school was giving them that light that they might find it harder to see at home. We know from some of the research with, for instance, our refugees and refugee students coming into Canada. Canada has quite a few refugee students, and they're integrated into our classrooms. When they first come to Canada, one of my good colleagues, Sophie Yohani, did some hope research with them, and the concern was raising hope with them because maybe they'd seen so much difficulty that they couldn't find hope. But Sophie sensitively worked with the students to have the kids make pictures of what hope looked like to them. Some of them said, hope looks like the UN food truck coming into my refugee camp before I came to Canada. So the kids knew what hope was and they could identify it. And what was fascinating is the parents and the cultural brokers who were working with the kids were concerned that the kids might say there was no hope and that it would be a bad activity. What actually happened is the kids were able to identify locations of hope for themselves, and upon sharing it with their parents and the cultural brokers, the parents and the cultural brokers found hope. So we see this kind of reciprocal way in which student hope and teacher hope can affect one another. And I think that's we call it the contagion, or the emotional contagion of hope. And again, that's really an advantageous quality in the classroom. Amy's talked about it kind of, I think, in the way that Amy, you talk about some year students don't complete all their assignments, or they're not particularly interested in a lesson. And that's exactly when you decide to pull out your hope lessons, because that's when the students become the most engaged. And of course, when the students become the most engaged, it impacts the teachers and their parents as well. So I hope that helped to answer that question.
I can jump just a little bit. I was thinking too, like I've taught this to literally hundreds of kids, and it's not personality traits I notice, but I find that some kids are very willing and will do anything I tell them to do. So they will try my hope activities, and some are very resistant, like the one I told you. And so it takes a lot more coaxing and just trust me, trust the process, I guess, right? They're really just not willing, but it's those students that I find really learn what it means and take that forward with them. So it's not personality traits so much, I think, as like just life experiences as to how well they use that material, if that makes sense.
I see Sude raising her hand. Do you want to add something?
Well, I was listening to, could I call you Miss Amy? While I was listening to Miss Amy's answer, I thought of a little question of my own. Would you say that hope has a lot to do with trust? Because I thought about it for a second, and I think it might, because when people are generally unable to hope in any situation, for myself, an example for myself, for example, I said example, what sometimes happens with me is I don't trust that hope will take me somewhere, or I sometimes question whether or not I should put my trust in that hope. So what would your comments be on that?
That's really interesting, actually. I've never thought of it that way, but it makes sense the way you're thinking it. From experience, I wouldn't say so much trust is definitely relationships. I don't think, and every teacher could do this, just jump right into everything and go whole hog like I've been doing. But to me, relationships are the first part that I establish in my classroom, right? And so when I said in my hope map that I talk about how I fill in my hope map, and I'm very open with my students. So I hope that they trust me, like you said, and I don't start the hope stuff on day one with my kids. I build that relationship. I make sure that they know it's a safe space. Like when they're filling some things in, I'll let them know, like, this is something that's going to be on display, so be careful, watch what you write, or this is something that I won't show to anyone, right? There's a lot of that relationship building, but the trust connection is very interesting. I like that.
May I contribute just a little bit here? And that is that it's really important to think of hope as a process rather than an outcome when we're doing some of this, right? So hope is hard. It's hard to hope right now, but if it's a process, we don't have to slam the door and say, oh, it's over, there is no hope. We just be curious about how hope will develop. And I think going back to the goals piece, Sude, you're talking about something that you hope for dearly. Well, that's something meaningful. So it's uncertain and it's a little bit vulnerable. So it feels a little risky to say, well, I'm hoping for this. And still, we all have those kinds of hopes. And that's one of the things we know about hope, is that it's tied to whatever is most deeply meaningful to us. And it also tends to be tied to uncertainty, right? So we just acknowledge that, and we're a little gentle or tender. We build the relationships, as Amy says, so that the people around us feel safe enough to say what it is they hope for, knowing that it may or may not happen. The other thing we know from research is that when we hope, we tend to lean into a problem. So we tend to try harder. We might not know if it will materialize or not, but we will lean into the question or the problem, and we'll try harder. And when we do that, it's more likely to make the outcome you want to have happen.
I just want to, well, thank you for the answers and the question. There's like a lovely conversation going here, and I don't want to really interrupt, but I have to be aware of our time. But I see Berk's hand, so maybe let's take Berk's last question and then move on with our Hope Is Poems answers and the closing part.
Right, so I actually have a question of mine that's related with Sude's question. So when she mentions trust, I immediately think of, trust in what? For example, like I think that could be trust in life, God, if you will, or maybe more in a more simpler term, just somebody's government themselves. So I think what I'm trying to just ask is like, would you say where a person is born would affect, how hopeful they are? Like somebody who's born in a country who has seen countless wars, like, would you say, would they be able to feel as hopeful as somebody would be living a really quality life in somewhere else, maybe?
Just outstanding questions from everyone, and I thank you for investing in really thinking about this relationship between trust and hope is a really fundamental one, and I don't think that we have all of the answers to that yet, Berk. But I will say, and I think I see it in the chat, someone asks that the light shines brighter in the darkness. And have we seen that in our research? Is hope something that's more encouraging in difficult times? And we do know actually from research that people are most aware of hope when they're facing difficulty and struggle. I would be very hesitant to say that when facing difficulty, people have less hope. I think they become more aware of the need for hope and often become more aware of where they're able to find hope, because they're actively searching and thinking, now, where is the hope that I can attach to in this particular circumstance? So for some people, it will be hope in a like a spiritual hope, a higher power in God. For other people, that's not it. For some people, and I like going back to the teacher in the classroom, that's a really fundamental hope relationship, sense of trust between students and teachers. So that's often a source of hope, an initial source of hope for children and kids. And we know in therapy, for instance, that the relationship between the therapist and the client struggling, perhaps having very dark thoughts and really finding it difficult, the first place they find hope often is when they can tell their client or their therapist just how difficult their experiences are. So I think the thing to be curious about is, where is the hope? At Hope Studies, we hold the belief that hope is always possible, but sometimes it's hard to find. So we have to work at locating where hope might be. And while we're waiting to find it, we can be curious about where it might appear. Sometimes it shows up in the most surprising places.
Thank you, Denise. I think your answer actually covered the last two questions we had in the chat. The one you've actually read, the light shines brighter in the darkness one. And the one before that, it was written in Turkish, so you may not probably understood it. I think Berk's question also covered that as well. It was, if it not, maybe you can answer it, but it's a question asking that in Turkey, there is a saying that geography is destiny. So do you think geography affects hope? And if so, what percentage would it affect?
That, again, great question. I'm going to have trouble being as specific as a percentage, but I think that our culture, where we live in the world, definitely influences how we understand hope, what it means, where we find it. So I think that's fundamentally important to recognize, which is why I approach this talk with such excitement and a little humility, because I know that how it looks in Turkey will be somewhat different than it is in Canada, and we can just be curious about those differences. What I'm also fascinated by, both in this conversation but also in research, is that in any cultures and languages that hope has been studied, so for instance, Brazil, there are many, Japan, South Africa, Australia, all over the world, right? There are many hope studies happening. That hope is meaningful, seems to be meaningful regardless of the language and the culture. How it's understood changes a little bit, and sometimes there's more than one word for hope. So what's fascinating is that you were telling me that hope is a common name in Turkish. It's a common name in Arabic. It's a common name in English. You know, this suggests that there's something important about hope regardless of culture. And then we could just be really curious about talking with one another about how it looks in our own geography. Yeah.
I think this actually connects us quite well to the Hope is poem to see how culture affects. So let's see the answers. And maybe Chelsea and Denise, you can help me with going through this poem.
Sure, that sounds great.
Chelsea, do you want to respond?
Sure, yeah, I can for sure. And I'm wondering if Nazlı, if you might just help me read it out loud. I know reading it through the screen, and I know it will take a bit of time, but I do imagine that will have some impact. And perhaps we can do, you know, for the sake of time, not the whole thing, but maybe if we can alternate. I'll read the English, if you read the Turkish one, and we'll just do maybe the first 5 or 6.
Okay.
So hope is light.
Are we going to do it in the same time? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Umut hayallerinin tohumunu atmaktır.
Whatever I need to survive.
Yaşamak.
A butterfly breaking out of the chrysalis.
Umut benim için bir çocuğun gülümsemesidir.
Motivation.
Özgürlük.
Future.
İnatçıdır.
And then we could continue going. This is a beautiful Hope Is poem. And I think it does really start to capture this multidimensional, dynamic, and unique aspects of hope. And what I will say is that we will post this Hope Is poem on the Sharp SMH website and through our social media channels. I can share that with Sezin School as well. So everyone will have access to this if it's beneficial, because I do think it's one way to think about practicing hope is finding ways that we can revisit and sort of spark hope in our own experiences. And I think now moving into closing, I was tasked with the wonderful yet difficult job of sort of summarizing our wonderful talk today. And I was jotting down some notes of things that stood out to me. And I think the conversation where we sort of ended highlighted one of the other components that I really like about hope, is that it is quite realistic. And I think it gets lumped in with optimism and wishing as being very Pollyanna at times. And I do think it can have that effect. But when I say it's realistic, what I mean is that hope and hopelessness can exist at the same time. And I think not all of us think about that. I think sometimes we think we're either hopeful or hopeless, but we can have a bit of both. And I think in the global experiences that we've shared over the past 1.5 to 2 years, I think this idea of us bumping up to challenging times, this idea of this need for an awareness of hope has become really prevalent in many of our experiences. And then what I like about hope is because it's realistic, and I do believe that we can always find it. And like we've talked about today, even though it is hard to find sometimes, it can be taught. We can learn how to search for hope. We can practice hope on our own or in our communities. And I'm so fortunate to work with teachers and students and learn about how much teachers and students can be such an important source of hope, not only for school communities, but the community at large. So I just really wanted to acknowledge that perspective. And if we can shift and tilt into hope, then it leaves us perhaps in a hard place today, but able to hope for something better tomorrow. Maybe I'll just check in with you, Denise, to see if you had any other kind of concluding thoughts for us before we wrap up today.
I think you did a beautiful job, Chelsea. Thank you so much for wrapping up in such a beautiful way.
My pleasure.
Well, thank you once again. I think it was a lovely panel. It was really nice to have you all three joining us. And coming back to the question of how to create a hopeful future, I think designing a hopeful future starts with hopeful education. So I would like to thank all of you, Dr. Larsen, Denise, Chelsea Hobbs, and Amy Badger, for your valuable participation in this panel and for this wonderful collaboration. And I apologize because I missed thanking Susanus'un, who is helping us translate tonight. So she is our head of our English department, and I would like to thank her before we close as well. So once again, thanks everyone for joining us, and we wish you all hopeful minds and a hopeful future, I guess. So goodbye, everyone.
It's a privilege. Bye-bye.